ordering meat processing plants across the country to stay open during the pandemic. Why some lawmakers say it could do more harm than good. I'll have that full story coming up.
I'm Alexandra Limon in Washington. President Trump signed an executive order forcing meat processing plants to remain open. Coming up, I'll tell you why some are concerned the food supply chain will be impacted anyway.
Democrats want more support for public workers on the front lines. I'm Basil John reporting in Washington the demands lawmakers have for the next stimulus package.
While some hospitals have been overwhelmed by coronavirus patients, many others nationwide have been underwhelmed and have had to lay off or furlough their staff and their workers. I'm Joe Khalil here in Washington. What lawmakers here are encouraging states to do to try to reverse that trend.
Louisiana's Democratic governor meets with President Trump over federal and state efforts to combat the coronavirus crisis. I'm Jesse Tenor in Washington, and I'll have that story coming up.
I'm Morgan Wright in Washington. The House has canceled its return back to the Capitol next week, but now some lawmakers are hashing out the details of how they can get their work done.
I'm Anna Warnicki in Washington. As Texas prepares to reopen its doors on Friday, there's mixed reactions from lawmakers on Capitol Hill. Some fear it's too soon, others say it's not soon enough. I'll have that story coming up.
In cold storage, there's about a 2-week supply. Beyond that, there's a problem.
With the national meat supply under threat, Iowa Senator Chuck Grassley is applauding the president's decision to order meat processing plants across the country to stay open during the pandemic.
The plants aren't operating just because everybody's sick. They aren't operating because people don't want to come to work because they think they might get the virus.
Last week, Tyson's pork plant in Iowa became one of the largest operations to close after workers expressed safety concerns. Workers across the country say conditions on assembly lines can make it nearly impossible to social distance. To help ease fears, the Trump administration says more protective gear is on the way.
The way you're going to build that confidence is show them that it's going to be a safer place to work.
But with thousands of plant workers already hospitalized by the virus and nearly 24 dead, labor unions say confidence won't return unless testing is available daily and employees have access to full paid sick leave if they're infected.
This has to be done in a way that does not threaten people's lives.
Michigan Democrat Senator Debbie Stabenow says while some companies are promising to step up, she's concerned there isn't enough federal oversight to ensure all workers are protected.
Make sure that in every plant, the right things are being done. So I want to make sure it's done the right way.
USDA says more details on the executive order are on the way. In Washington, Raquel Martin.
The COVID-19 outbreak closed meat processing plants around the country. Now an executive order from President Trump is forcing plants to stay open and preventing more widespread closures.
There was a bottleneck caused by this whole pandemic.
The order declares the facilities essential infrastructure, something Senator Mike Rounds of South Dakota says will ensure the food supply chain remains stable. Rounds says closed processing plants mean livestock goes to waste.
That will be past the point where they can be harvested at the right time and will probably have to be euthanized.
The executive order also protects companies from lawsuits if employees get sick.
The big companies that you've been reading about, they are so thrilled, they're so happy, they're all gung-ho, and we solved their problems.
But the union representing the plant workers says their problems are not solved, and they're concerned about the shortages of personal protective equipment.
What we need to have now is the proper PPE layered on top of layers of PPE to properly do this job safely. We have to have testing. They didn't mention anything about how they were going to start testing.
The United Food and Commercial Workers Union says 21 meatpacking employees have died from coronavirus and more than 5,000 are sick. UFCW adds that if workers aren't healthy, the food supply chain will be impacted anyway. In Washington, Alexandra Limon.
We're in a much, much better place than we thought was even possible 5 or 6 weeks ago. I will tell you.
Louisiana's Democratic Governor, John Bel Edwards, told President Trump his state has turned the corner in the coronavirus crisis, even though Louisiana remains the 5th highest per capita for cases in the U.S.
Testing is one of the great reasons that you've been successful in Louisiana.
Yes, sir, with a lot of help from our federal partners.
Edwards now doesn't plan to reopen his state until May 15th, but he said the commitment from the country's testing czar, Admiral Brett Joie, to deliver on states' requests gave him the confidence he needed to move forward. The president has promised 5 million tests per month.
I don't know about 5 million for the country, but Louisiana is going to do our part with 200,000 per month.
One of Louisiana's senators, John Kennedy, said the U.S. will never have enough testing, so state economies should just reopen.
In a perfect world, we'd give everybody a home test and they could test twice a day. But we don't live in Logon land.
Kennedy said states should change their business classifications from essential and non-essential to safe and unsafe.
All the businesses are essential if you have a job there.
President Trump said he plans to let the official White House social distancing rules expire Thursday and leave decisions on when and how to reopen completely up to the governors. In Washington, I'm Jesse Tenor.
We need to get the economy going, and I think Texans will lead the way.
Texas Republican Congressman Jody Arrington says he supports Governor Greg Abbott's decision to lift the state's stay-at-home order on Friday. Retail stores, restaurants, movie theaters, and malls can all open for business.
Get our businesses back up and running and move forward, and we can do that responsibly and safely.
The state will open in phases. Businesses that open on Friday will only be allowed to operate at 25% capacity. But Texas Democrat Lloyd Doggett fears it's too soon.
To basically have the governor say it's okay to go back to the mall, go watch a movie, these are things that can cost lives.
Doggett says states should be following doctors' orders, which means staying home for now.
I'm concerned that there has not been enough attention given to medical science here.
Have we had 2 weeks of positive cases going down there? No.
Texas Democratic Congressman Henry Cuellar agrees.
I do want to open up the economy in a very measured, cautious way.
But Arrington says waiting any longer could force businesses to close for good.
There will be greater long-term harm from that.
Libraries and museums can also open Friday. As for barbershops, salons, gyms, and bars, the governor says he expects them to open no later than mid-May. In Washington, I'm Anna Warnicki.
New York Congressman Tom Reed says he would much rather the House of Representatives conduct the work of the people in person in the nation's capital.
You can't tell me that we can't figure out a way for Congress to go back to work in Washington, D.C.
Reed is the co-chair of the Bipartisan Problem Solvers Caucus. He says the group is working to solve this problem.
25 Democrats, 25 Republicans are going to initiate a virtual Congress to show that you can do this, and then we'll open it up to other members who want to participate.
Reed warns handing over proxy votes to the party leadership gives too much power to too few lawmakers.
You can't have 4 people making decisions for 320 million people.
We do live in the 21st century.
New York Congressman Antonio Delgado says lawmakers should be able to use technology to legislate without crowding into the Capitol.
And it is a change in conduct and in tradition to some extent, which, as you might imagine, takes some will as well.
Despite the House action, Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell says the Senate will be back on May 4th.
Next week, we haven't even hit our peak in D.C. yet.
New York Senator Kirsten Gillibrand.
I think Mitch McConnell's taking a huge risk with the well-being of a lot of the members that work in this office, along with our staffs.
Congressman Reed says the Problem Solvers Caucus plans to meet virtually next week. Reporting in Washington, I'm Morgan Rowe.
More people than you might realize operate without something many take for granted.
There are many consumers who are so-called unbanked, who don't have savings and checking accounts.
Leonard Chanin, deputy to the chairman of the FDIC, says about 8 million U.S. households don't use a bank. That means more than 14 million Americans are getting a paper stimulus check.
And we've tried to give information to consumers to ensure that they're aware of opportunities out there.
The FDIC wants all Americans without a bank account to get one. Officials say it's a safer way to protect your stimulus money and faster if Congress issues more emergency funding in the future.
There's a delay in terms of the time it takes for consumers to get checks versus automatic deposit.
That delay can last weeks or even more than a month. And beyond that, the quarantine means fewer bank employees are at work as more banks move operations online.
Particularly these days, consumers may not have an easy time cashing those checks.
Chanin says because the FDIC insures banks for up to $250,000, there's no reason for new account holders to worry about their money's safety. And he says banks are making it easier for consumers to open accounts.
And there are a number of banks that will allow you to open accounts even without depositing funds initially.
The FDIC also has a COVID-19 section on its website to help answer banking questions. Reporting in Washington, I'm Trevor Shirley.
Most hospitals in California and across the nation now seem to be holding their own.
We're starting to see hospital admissions and ICU admissions go down.
But Congressman Ami Bera says now, as they continue to fight the coronavirus, hospitals are also fighting to stay in business.
Our hospital has furloughed 1,300 people, so we need to get them back to work.
Congressman and physician Phil Rowe says thankfully his Tennessee district saw relatively few COVID patients. He says as most hospitals in the region cleared space and canceled elective surgeries, they lost their main revenue source.
Just my own practice, the revenues are 50% of what they were last year.
Healthcare workers in California are also facing furloughs. Bera says he supports the governor's decision to allow for some elective surgeries to get healthcare workers back on the job. But Bera says in order for hospitals to remain safe as they gradually open back up, the public has an important role to play.
We're going to have to continue to practice social distancing. Let's get out of this together.
If you look at the hospitals with PPEs and the ability to disinfect, it's probably one of the safest places.
Congressman Raul Ruiz says hospital networks should gradually return to elective surgery, but only in regions where the curve has flattened.
If you are still on the upswing in the transmission rate curve, then it might not be a good time.
Ruiz says hospitals may need even more aid in the next phase of coronavirus relief from Congress. In Washington, I'm Joe Khalil.
Police, firefighters, and other local government staff are on the front lines of battling the coronavirus. But House Democrats worry if local and state government can afford to keep them employed.
Now more than ever, we need to ensure that our state agencies keep their staff going.
Pennsylvania Representative Matt Cartwright says he wants the federal government to provide support for frontline public service workers in the next coronavirus aid package.
Money coming into our state, our counties, our cities, it's only trickling in right now, and it has a big impact on people that all of us rely on.
President Trump has said he doesn't want states with budget problems before the outbreak to benefit from federal funds now. But Pennsylvania Representative Susan Wild says the impact of the outbreak should outweigh this concern.
The funding for their first responders, their emergency personnel, who are so vital to everybody, is seriously jeopardized.
Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell suggested allowing states to declare bankruptcy is the best option, but Democrats say that isn't the help states need.
Inviting states to apply for bankruptcy protection is the opposite of solving problems.
It suggests that we are not all equal under our system of government, and that just is unacceptable to me.
Both Cartwright and Wild says they are talking to Republicans in the House to win over their support. Reporting in Washington, I'm Basil John.
أنا كتير اشتقت للقعدة في المحل، أشوف الناس الأجانب، أحكي معاهم. حتى الشغل أنا كتير اشتقت له، لأنه هاي أنا إشي زي هواية عندي، يعني بحب أعملها مثل أنا بكون مبسوطة أو حتى أنا مش مبسوطة كتير، بس بحب أشتغلها. يعني هذا الإشي بخليني كتير مبسوطة، بيسعدني، بيريحني.
I mean, post-Katrina, New Orleans was a place where a lot of people who were idealistic, who wanted to help out, they came. And the thing is, the people here, the level of community is a little bit unparalleled, in my opinion. And so after you get exposed to that, a lot of people, you know, kind of fall in love with it, and they end up living here.
Et là, voilà, il y avait de la joie, il y avait des paroles, des musiques, des vidéos, des gens qui écrivent, des fleurs, tout ça, il y avait. Et là, on a rien, stop, on arrête on évacue les corps, quoi. C'est un peu ça. Hein. Donc, ces gens rassemblés autour d'une personne qu'ils ont aimée, qu'ils ont connue, ou qui veulent. Ils veulent être là pour témoigner de leur affection à un proche du défunt, voilà. Et des gens qui prennent la parole, qui ont un peu de sensibilité, qui ont un peu d'esprit. Tout ça, il n'y a pas. Ça a disparu totalement.
Fiscally speaking, GDP shrinks 4.8%. Curious your reaction on that.
But if you would have said we would have been at 24,000 with what we've gone through as a country, John Bell, it's pretty amazing. And I think I read where this is one of the best weeks in the stock market this last short period of time that we've had since the 1950s or 1940s. So I think there's a tremendous feeling of optimism in this country. I can only say that there's going to be a tremendous feeling of optimism. I think the third quarter is transitional. We're transiting into, but it's a very transitional period. I think it's going to do good. But I think the fourth quarter is going to be fantastic. Well, as you know, we just worked with the meat processors, the companies that we're talking about. You know the ones I'm talking about because they've all become very well known. They were well known anyway. They're big companies, but they're now being treated fairly. They're thrilled, and that whole bottleneck is broken up.
So the Defense Production Act protects them from
Well, we use it. That's what we did. We used it, and it helps them greatly to do what they have to do, because they're ready to do it, but they needed some help.
How do you protect the workers, though, in those plants? What are you doing to protect
Well, we're
them?
doing that. We're going to have a report on that probably this afternoon. We're going to have good form of protection, and through quarantine, when we find somebody that's not, they're going to be very careful. They are, as to who's going into the plant, and the quarantine is going to be very strong, and we're going to make people better when they have a problem. We're going to get them better. Hopefully, they're going to get better.
I get questions about it from time to time, but I think that's more the one-off. We're playing it day by day. I got my guy a half a mile away. I haven't had an issue yet. Is there potential? Sure, but maybe the Defense Production Act addresses that.
Well, I think the meat is fresher here. That's one reason. So I like to come down. You got a lot of meat to choose from.
They always have meat. So I don't know where they're getting their supply from, but it's all good. This is the most serious economic decline or contraction in the U.S. since the fourth quarter of 2008. That's when the great financial crisis was going full boil. Unfortunately, we know that what we're experiencing right now, the second quarter of this year, is going to be much worse. So the reality is that we hope and we think that the contraction for the full year will not be anywhere nearly as serious as what we see in the current quarter, simply because, as we know, we're beginning to see a resumption of some economic activity sporadically across the country. And obviously the hope is that as we mitigate the medical crisis, that the response to that will also begin to wane, meaning that we can resume the kinds of economic activity as consumers and businesses and governments would like. And that means that there is eventually a return to the new normal. Make no mistake about it, we're going to go through many months yet of dispiriting economic data. We still have to get our arms around the forthcoming April employment report. That's going to look miserable. We know that we've had something approaching 30 million people file new claims for unemployment benefits. The unemployment rate is going to go into the high double digits, into the teens, and perhaps eventually at 20%. And those are all going to be benchmarks and historical data points that will set records on the grim side. And obviously, we're hoping that we'll be able to put all that behind us sooner rather than later.
It's never an uncomfortable feeling. It's more of just the unknown.
Is it a male or a female? Male.
It's just with this scenario and the COVID positive patients, you're worried about yourself. You're worried about, am I protected? Am I covered appropriately?
You are very fearful of contracting the virus just because of the closeness of you to that patient's airway and to the virus.
This is what a breathing tube looks like, and when we place this in, it'll go through your vocal cords into your trachea.
It's like feeling that almost like you can see the virus.
I think if you are in this profession, you have to have some form of empathy for these people. They're alone. Most of them are afraid. They don't know what's going on. They don't know if they're going to wake up with a breathing tube in or not wake up at all.
For a while, I kept track of who I had intubated to see how they were doing, and after a while, I stopped. It was a little depressing.
You do realize, when they're looking up at you and you push that sedation through the IV, that yeah, theoretically, you could be the last person they ever see.
It kind of normalizes those emotions and makes you feel like it's okay to kind of feel the fear, the anxiety, the guilt that you feel.
I think there's going to be a significant amount of anxiety, depression, and post-traumatic stress that comes of this epidemic. And I'm very hopeful that we take care of that in the way that we should.
Oh, say, can you see by the dawn's early light what so proudly we held at the twilight's last gleaming, whose broad stripes and bright stars through the perilous fight o'er the ramparts we watched were so gallantly streaming, and the rockets' red glare, the bombs bursting in air, gave proof through the night that our flag was still there.